Welcome to the summer edition of the Putting the Human Back into Technology podcast. For this special edition, Mark and I are joined by Joel Abbott of XRM Consultants and Steve Stiles of Nigel Frank Recruitment. And in this special episode, we're taking a look at the Power Platform and some of the new and exciting features that have been announced in that particular technology. Okay, everybody, welcome to Putting the Human into Technology with Gethin Ellis and Mark Williams. We're currently in between seasons 1 and 2 of our regular PHIT podcast, but with one eye on the up-and-coming autumn wave release of Dynamics 365, we thought we'd ask a couple of our trusted associates, Joel Abbott and Steve Stiles, to give us their take on some of the announcements that our friends at Microsoft have made during the last year or so. But before we get into those questions, I'm just going to ask Joel and Steve to introduce themselves to you all. So Joel and Steve, we'll start with Joel. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, your business and your role.
Sure, thanks, Keith. Thanks for having us on, mate. My name's Joel Abbott. I've been working with Dynamics since the heady days of CRM4, the dark days, I should say, of CRM4, building solutions for clients. And I've always got a huge buzz out of delivering solutions on the platform because of the capabilities it had. Went from that to starting XRM Consultant, which is my company. And for the last 7-8 years, we've been delivering solutions for our clients such as the RCN, Money Advice Trust, and others, and really trying to help clients improve their business processes using the Power Platform and Dynamics 365. And then just this week, we launched XRM training to help people learn the platform in an effective way. So that's me.
Cool. Thanks, Joel. And Steve, same question to you, mate. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, etc.
Yeah, cheers, Kev. So I don't think I have as much to say as Joel, but I focus on recruiting for the Dynamics 365 customer engagement market, but more in recent years with a particular focus for the not-for-profit sector. Been doing it for a few years now.
Cool. And who's that with, Steve? Just give them a mention, give them a plug, mate. Make it fair.
Nigel Frank.
Joel's got his two in. You're allowed to get yours in as well, mate. It's only Cool. All right. Thank you for that, guys. Thank you both. So we've got someone here from recruitment background and Joel with a technical Power Platform, CRM, Dynamics background. And I guess what we're kind of keen of you sort of, what from the announcement that's been made at various events, Inspire and Ignite, would be your sort of top 3 takeaways. We know there's been a lot going on, and Joel, you've been busy starting your training business and delivering solutions. And Steve, I know we've spoken several times around various sort of opportunities and contracts and things. So there's been a lot going on in that space. What are your sort of top 3 takeaways from this year's announcements, either from Inspire or Ignite or other announcements that have been made around the Power Platform? And we'll go to Joel first, just to keep it in order.
Cool. It's a funny one, these Microsoft events. I do love the events. The brilliant ways of looking into not just what Microsoft are releasing for your particular area of focus, but some of the stuff they're doing with HoloLens and integrating that into the solution is mind blowing. Not my area of expertise, but that's kind of the point that you see the wider plan with Microsoft. I think it's an interesting one because we've had Inspire, we've had Engage, we've had Build, and there is a large amount of crossover. So probably my top 3, Geth, are a bit of a mashup of things that have come out of all the events. But yeah. I think for me, mate, the big thing was this concept of convergence. So Microsoft have built these awesome solutions, Power Platform, Dynamics 365, Teams, Office 365, and slowly but surely they've been moving them towards each other, and now we're really starting to see some of this powerful convergence or merging of these technologies. So for example, the way that Dynamics 365 and Teams is going to come together. Now, for quite a while, we've been able to have a Dynamics 365 tab in Teams where you could go and see a record. But the fact that now is going to be a much more, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Streamlined experience. So, for example, I can be sat in Teams, I can open up a record that's related to the channel that I'm talking about, and the user experience has the chat down the side, the channel, and I can interact with the record and the chat, and it's all tracked onto the Dynamics 365 record. So a colleague replies about some chat message I've sent them, that's now tracked into the timeline of the record so that another colleague can access it. So I'm probably not explaining it massively well, but I think that is going to be so powerful, because you're going to have these Teams-focused people who are going to be brought into the Dynamics 365 world, and it's going to make life so much easier. So that's one. It's a big one, but it's one.
Okay.
Two is Powerfx. I think Powerfx is going to be a big step forward in the Dynamics and Power Platform space, because there's always been Powerfx around. Essentially, it's the coding language in Excel. But what a brilliant way of bringing a language to the wider solutions, because a lot of people know Excel, a lot of people know the formulas in Excel. But then if, perhaps like me, you started with Powerfx from not a background of Excel, the fact they've now formalized it, they've created, it's become an open source language as well. So it can be brought into all these different aspects and change. For me, one of the biggest things is what was announced, that Powerfx is now going to be available in model-driven apps. I think that's going to be huge. I think there's going to be so much you're going to be able to do with that now, not just around UI, but around handling the data and the app experience. I think it's just at the start of the journey with what we're going to see people do with that. And then finally, my last one, promise, and then I'll shut up, is custom pages. Now, if you're not familiar with developing solutions in the Power Platform, you might think, well, what's the big deal about custom pages? Custom pages, I predict, are going to be something that is going to really take off, and it's going to be because of the way the Microsoft community uses them. So what is a custom page? Well, essentially, it used to be that you could only create a form around an entity. Yeah. Now, in a model-driven app, you can create, much like you can in a Canvas app, a page, and you control everything about that page. So the two things about that to remember. One is it gives you massive amounts of flexibility over what you can do with the experience. So things like dialogues or connecting other systems with other data sources and bringing that into a custom page in a model-driven app is massively powerful. But I think it's a peak at where Microsoft are going. You know, classically, if you're going to build an app, I think what you would have done is you would have started with, is it Canvas or model-driven? I think in 2 years' time, if that, no, yeah, probably 2 years' time, we're going to see everything's an app, and you just start from an app maker experience, which is really exciting. So there you go. That's my three. Sorry to go on.
So I was going to ask you that question, Joel, just before we go to Steve, because the thing with Microsoft is that they guide you to think in their way, as opposed to the way in which application designers and builders are historically taught to think. So historically, you know, somebody, if you're designing an application, you're going, oh, what's the UI? You know, what's the middleware architecture? What's the underlying database architecture? Right, tell me all the requirements, and I'll build it for you. Thank you very much. So, just to summarise, do you think then that essentially a Canvas app and a model-driven app will be no more in the future, and it'll be just one thing? And there'll be a range of tools, if you like, within that will be able to layer upon each other to be able to produce an app from the way that people used to produce an app, i.e., what UI do you want? You know, what's your underlying data sources and all that sort of thing.
Basically, yeah. I think what we're moving to is an experience much like okay. So this is Microsoft would probably kill me for this comparison, but think of a website. You go into one of these sites like Wix or something like that, and they say, here's a template if you want to just crack on and get started with your site, but then you can also add blank pages, or you can start from a blank page, but you're still just creating a site. That's the concept. It's one site, whether you use some of their templated pages or you don't. I think right now, in people's minds, it's either Canvas app, which means mobile, or model driven, which means laptop computer device. I think what we're going to move to is app, and there will be elements in that app that are you will use a blank page for, and there'll be elements within that app that you use the template that they bring for the UI and the experience.
Cool.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
what about you, Steve? What's your take on your top 2 or 3 from our friends at Microsoft this year? Then.
Yeah, so I think my first one is quite similar to Joel's first one, actually, but I've thought about it from a little bit more of a business benefit perspective. So the ability that to see D365 now through Teams. I think in the context of the not-for-profit sector, for example, say like fundraisers perhaps who wouldn't necessarily need to manipulate data or configure the system, they can now see data in Dynamics and use it for their day job without paying for a Dynamics license. So I feel like that's going to open it up to a lot more charities or perhaps universities where, say, the students need to see Dynamics and maybe just for sake of argument, course information or whatever. So I think it's made it a lot cheaper for these types of organizations. So that's a pretty big one for me. I think all of it was quite Azure heavy from Ignite and Inspire. So while I do get involved in Azure, we have a separate team that covers it from a full-on perspective. But I will still touch it when it comes to stuff like migration, for example, or integration. And one of the things I noticed was they're making migration to Azure easier from data warehouses and other back-end databases. I think through Azure Synapse Pathway was the particular thing mentioned. So again, I think it's making it a lot more viable for organizations who are quite immature in their transformation journeys and migration journeys, because they can do a lot more themselves perhaps and lean less on a supplier or lean less on getting a load of consultants in and risking the knowledge transfer. And the other thing I found quite interesting was that this is a simple one, but they're splitting the D365 fundamentals certification up from being ERP and CRM to ERP or CRM and having separate certs. I think that's just obviously for novice Dynamics enthusiasts or just people looking to get into the Dynamics space. It's just, again, making it more accessible. So I think actually probably my takeaway from all of that is they're making it more accessible for clients and users and professionals as time goes on.
Definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. That's I think that's probably fair. I think that probably reflects my sort of thoughts around it as well. Just so is it probably, Mark, this is your question, I think, but I'll take it now because I'm talking. So which, and this is a question to both of you, we'll go to Steve first and then we'll come back to Joel because I think Joel will have plenty to say. Which of the do we think is going to have the most benefit?
Is this in the what the most benefit out of those 3 points?
Well, out of the ones that you both covered. So you can pinch one of Joel's if you want, but don't do that because you know what it's like.
Yeah, boost his ego. Yeah, I'd probably say the Teams one, to be honest, just because if I'm speaking from my sector I focus on specifically, it's just money saving is a huge consideration for non-profit organizations, much more so than many others, in my opinion. So that's gonna be a game changer, the ability to see Dynamics data in Teams.
Yeah.
What about you, Joel? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because I look at it from two aspects. So I think Steve's right. I think that this convergence of solutions between Dynamics and Teams is going to be. I think it's going to drive a lot more business decisions than people anticipate, because I bang a drum about this, Mark, as you particularly well know, but licensing is something that is so often left to the end of a project, and it's such an epic mistake because it's a project killer. If you don't consider it up front, when you are designing the solution to be license efficient, it can cause massive problems. And I think what we're going to see as a result of that is, as companies come onto that and realize that, they're going to see that, hold on a minute here, I don't need to give everyone a full Dynamics 365 for sales license now. I can just give that to the people who need the D365 functionality, and make sure that everyone in Teams can now access that data, view it, etc. So I think that's going to be game changing in the uptake of these solutions. I think from a technical aspect though, and again, go with me on this, I think it's the custom pages, because I think what's going to happen here is we're going to see, much like what happened with Power Automate, much like what happened with Powerapps and chatbots even, actually, when the technology is released, what the community does with it can drive its importance. I'll give you an example, okay? So custom pages, there's someone I was listening to, shout out to Megan Walker and Lisa Crosby's Up podcast. Very, very good if you're in the dynamic space. And Megan mentioned someone who had taken this functionality of custom pages and used it to add a custom page that comes up when someone enters an app, to make them accept terms and conditions before you allow them to use the app. Now, I would never have thought of that use case of that, but actually it's really interesting when you start to think about it. But that's kind of my point, is once the community gets hold of these tools, their ability to come up with these different use cases, I think, is really going to drive that. And we're going to look at that as one of probably the key technical step forward for quite a while.
There's an interesting, I mean, this is me as usual going off on a bit of a segue. It's only taken whatever it is, 10 minutes to do that.
You look through your lens, Mark.
I will. I'll look through my lens, and as I see it, and so on and so forth. You've both mentioned a few things there, which I think are actually. In some respects, sort of typical Microsoft type things, but also very, very good. So, you talked about convergence and integration, both of you, and particularly in Teams. Well, whichever one becomes more prevalent, we'll see in terms of the user interface. Frankly, going forwards. Joel, you've talked about licensing. I want to come back to that sect. Steve, you've talked about skills a bit, and actually, I know from working in the Business Central space more recently that. The world of Dynamics isn't the same across each of the major components, i.e. CRM, ERP, Business Central, and God knows about HR, because I've never worked in that space at all. But I do think I'm thinking using the use case of the sector that we've all got in common, broadly the not-for-profit type sector. I do wonder about the level of skill, the level of knowledge that you need, because most of these organizations are not big, right? And they don't have large IT departments. And where do they get that level of knowledge? How do they, how do they trust in for their licensing? I mean, aside from, talking to one of us, of course, but, who do they, genuine question here now, right? You can't know everything. Licensing is damned hard work. Building a strategy, as to, so if we take Powerfx, right? Are they going to settle on the language within Excel, if you like, the structure of that and so on and so forth? Or are they going to, it is Microsoft now, are they going to settle on the structure of the language within Dynamics? We all know that Microsoft changed their mind on those things and eventually get, hit on the right spot and go forwards from there. But fundamentally, these organizations have got to take decisions, haven't they, based on what Microsoft are telling them. And so it's a genuine question about where are they really getting their advice, because they can't afford to employ £100,000 a year times 5 or 6 people really know this stuff inside out. Can they? Question mark. Or is it at their own peril? Don't employ those sorts of people. Should they be reliant on their single supplier? I'm not going to mention any of the individual suppliers here, but is that the game that they're really in? Or are they in the game of providing their own solutions on that? Should they be coming out to, smaller independents and our knowledgeable group, like, Steve associated with that? But frankly, how many of these people can we help solve at any one point in time? And it's hard for us to keep up with it as well. What do you think the answer is, guys, about where do they get this knowledge from in order to know how to make those decisions? Pick any one of the things that we've you've both spoken about. I don't know is the answer to the question from my perspective, but I am quite concerned about it because they've got to rely on someone to make a decision.
Steve, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think there's obviously no one single answer to that question, but I mean, from my take on it, because I'm not as close as you guys, obviously, but I hear about a lot of these problems from a variety of organizations. And like you say, Mark, it's often the suppliers that will provide all of this advice. And some suppliers are fantastic, but they don't understand the intricacies of these organizations. So they might recommend a licensing model that just doesn't work because they don't understand the company to the degree that they should. I think as well, like you say, there's not, especially in this NFT sector, they don't have the money, frankly, to hire a seasoned dynamics expert, and more importantly, retain them and price their salaries competitively versus other organizations that want to take them, because there's a shortage of skills in this subsector anyway. Yeah. What I've seen that has worked is get someone like yourselves in who already understands it on, if they don't have the money for a 5-day-a-week engagement for a few months, even on a statement of work basis, just agree a number of days, draw those days down on an hourly basis, perhaps, so you're maximizing the use of time when works for your stakeholders. And if you get someone in who's slightly more junior in the dynamics world, you don't have to pay as high of a salary. And obviously, as long as you offer flexible working, professional development and stuff, and that's the sort of qualities that will retain your staff, then transfer the knowledge from your contractor to your permie, because licensing and dynamics citizen development is a full-time job within itself, and I think it needs to be treated as such. So it takes a level of realization to come to terms with that. But once you do, that's a solution I've seen that actually works. But it's a bit of a leap to jump into if you're fairly immature in the IT space.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I think Steve's got a great insight into the market. Much better than any of us do. For me, I think it's a tricky decision for organisations, because. And I'm not here bashing the partner model, because I'm here as a Microsoft partner, albeit a smaller one than the big guys out there like Abbott and Red Spire, these great organisations who are brilliant, fantastic. But I think the trouble is that organisations will align themselves with a partner when they don't have the knowledge and skills in-house. And that partner becomes a channel for all that they hear and know from Microsoft. And I've seen that go really badly in the past, I'll have to be honest and say. Not with Red Spire or Avanade, they're brilliant organisations. They've got some absolutely top quality people there. But with other organisations, I've seen it go really badly, whereby basically what some organisations realise is, hey, we can say what we like here. And I don't like that. I don't think that helps the wider Microsoft offering in community, because it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths when they get busted, and invariably they do. Part of that is down to how you do business. Yeah, of course. I think a good strategy, and what I've seen work well, is, Steve was just, funnily enough, I was just having a conversation with a client about this morning, about recruiting. And if you want to get top talent, so you want to get some heavy hitter in dynamics, you're looking at 70 to 90 grand a year. Yeah. Now, what organisations have 70 to 90 grand a year to just spend like that to bring someone in when they're at the start of their journey? Not that many, to be fair. Yeah. So I've been recommending to people recently that you recruit not for skills and certifications, but you recruit for technologically creative talent. So people with drive, enthusiasm, who may not have the skills, but have that creativity to look at some of these new technologies and see how they could be applied. And then you work with a partner who can become your trusted advisor. Now, that doesn't always happen on a paid basis. So I've worked with clients where they'll get me in, they've got a project, they want me to come in, review what they're going to do. I'll come in and do that and say, great, yeah, looks great, off you go. Some of them have said, we want you to recruit someone, we help them get the person, and then off they go. But then 3-4 weeks down the line, they ring up and say, oh, I've heard this is happening, how does it impact me? And we'll have a chat, but you don't bill for that, because that's part of a relationship that you're building up with people. I think people learn to trust you a lot easier that way than saying, I tell you what, we're going to sign you up, we're going to do all your dynamic stuff for the next 24 months, and you're going to pay us a shed load of money. The best analogy I've heard for it was, if you think about in central London how many coffee shops there are, why do ones have queues out the door? And the reason is because people go back to the same coffee shop every morning for their coffee on the way to work. And why? Why would they do that? Why would they queue when there's a coffee shop down, probably 6 doors down the road? They queue because they know the barista knows how they want their drink. Even if it's a little bit more expensive, they know they can stand in line, get the drink they want, and move on. And I think that should be the aim of all, certainly independent partners like myself, but every partner actually, is to become that trusted partner for organizations, so that actually, do you know what, they know they can lean on you and trust you. And I think, Mark, and going back to your question, that's the answer to this, is for organizations finding a trusted partner that they can rely on their knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's good insight from both of you. Thank you for that. We're going to call this, Geth, we're going to call this the Fit Guide to Joel's Coffee Shop, aren't we, in terms of the headline of this? Never mind, we're not going to mention Microsoft and title at all.
Sponsored by Starbucks.
Right.
Just talking about this, Joel, though, I've been doing a bit of reading over the last few months on stuff around selling and relationship building and stuff like that. And that is what it is. It's the feeling they get from going to that coffee shop, because the barista does give them the service that they want. And yeah, they could go to the one up the street where there's no queue and have it done quicker. It's just a cup of coffee, but it's not the same experience, and that's what it is. But it's interesting stuff. It's all psychological. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool. Right. So let's get this back on track then. Before we go into sales pitch. Mark, where did we get to? What question are we on?
We're on. We've got wave 2 coming up. What's coming up in that, or what would you like to see? Where would you like to see Microsoft going? And Joel, you're not allowed to repeat merge Canvas app and model driven app. Okay, got to come up with something new, mate.
Excellent. Well, I've got some stuff, but I was reviewing this last night, and I thought they're going to think these are really epically boring.
Hang on a minute, then. I'm ready.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Interestingly, going back to that convergence point, Fluent UI Controls are coming.
Yeah.
So you've been able to use some of the components, like form components, the buttons and the controls and the way they work in Teams apps. Yeah. Powerapps that you build in Microsoft Teams. They're now coming to Dynamics apps within Teams. That seems like a thing. But to be honest, I think things like that are really important, because the more you can draw the user experience together for people, the more I think it's going to improve usability, essentially. This is a big one for me. Model-driven apps being offline with a single click of an option in the Maker portal. I think that's really cool. The fact that basically you can just say, I've got my model-driven app, I want it to work in offline mode, and all you have to do now is go into the Maker portal and click a button, or that's what you will be able to do. I think that's going to encourage a lot more people to do it without having to build a custom app. I can go on. There's themes for Powerapps, which is really cool, which I think is going to be great for ISVs who are building their own solutions to have this unified interface experience. And I really what's the word? A change that seems like it really shouldn't matter. But I think this is why wave releases are important and should be adopted as soon as possible by organizations, right? Is in wave 2, I believe, we're going to get Powerapps grid changes. All right, so you've seen a grid in a model-driven app. All right, so you look at a view of contacts. You're going to be able to, from that grid, drag the columns around and change the size of the columns. Now, why is that important? It's important because if you've sat in the seat of a user who every single time they want to see it has to go in and say, right, oh no, that column's not wide enough. I need to contact the development and get them to make it 350 pixels instead of 200 pixels because actually the data's changed now and we hold more data in that. It's these little things that just add grit to the user experience and really wind end users up. And when you go and speak to end users, they're like, oh, I couldn't just let me move the columns around, will you? Like, these are the things that frustrate people. So stupid little change, but I think things like that can have a big impact.
I saw something similar actually, Joel, about, and I'm probably not going to use the right term, but the way I interpreted it was essentially about how you can, you don't have to go all the way down the page now to find your find the thing that you're looking for. You know, there's some method of reordering that and bringing the things you use regularly effectively to prominence.
Yeah,
prominence in that. Okay, all right. Steve, what would you like to see, or what have you seen that you like?
Yeah, I think it's something that's been happening for a little while. Wave 2 is just expanding on it, but a hands down point of interest for me for quite a while has been what Microsoft are doing with the marketing module in Dynamics, because we've had like AI driven customer insights for a while, and like integration and taking data from all of your data touch points to form a single view of the customer, but they're doing much more around customer journey orchestration, and using AI to really dig deep into making marketing and advertising more tailored towards the user. So it's quite it's almost like something from out of the Terminator or something, where we're actually I know that sounds really stupid, but it's like what you're getting in terms of AI and the picture you can paint of a customer. It's really quite spooky when I was looking at it, and it's in the fundamentals, Dynamics fundamentals learning material. What you can actually find out about your customer is verging on creepy from the data you can get from.
Oh, the best! We've got the new title.
Yeah, there you go.
There's an ethics line. There's an ethics line in there. That you are going to need to consider, because it is very what's that Tom Cruise film where they can predict who's going to do a crime beforehand and people go to jail for 25 years for something they haven't actually done yet. I've got the name of the film, but yes, it is very these prediction models are very very accurate, and they can impinge on civil liberties a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So
it's taking the spooky side away from that, though. It is like really interesting what they're doing when you can build a view of your customer, and ultimately it's like, again, in the context of charities, you're not just targeting donors as a whole, you're targeting donors from 16 to 25 who are more likely to engage with you via social media and are more likely to donate via perhaps a payment gateway on WhatsApp or Instagram or whatever.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about that? Just going back to that point about it being slightly creepy. Do you think that we have? I guess it's an interesting conversation around AI and its morality. I guess for me, I view it slightly differently in that if I'm a customer and I've given my data to someone knowingly, then why wouldn't I want them to use all the tools available to drive the positive experience in the way that I want it? You know, I think with these solutions, you can almost see when Microsoft release AI things that people are a little bit like, oh, here we go, the robots are going to take over, and that, you know, there is a discussion there, but I think we almost need another term for it, because this sort of AI is insights into data customers have already given you. So yeah, I'm with you, Geth, on the kind of need to have a morality checkpoint on it. I think we can overthink that as well, in terms of how customers want us to use their data.
So I'll take your point, right? But I'm going to give you 2 examples. Right?
Go.
The first one, Target got really good at predicting when customers were pregnant. Right, the Target retailer in the US, right?
Yeah.
Really good, so good in fact, they were able to send out vouchers based off shopping habits and shopping basket analysis of when people were pregnant. Right now, this young teenage girl was using her dad's card, buying all the stuff pregnant women buy. Right, it made the prediction. It was a right prediction. They sent a mail shot to dad. Congratulations on your pregnancy. Have some vouchers for a nappy or something like that. The story goes, right? So dad finds out he's going to be granddad by a letter from Target. All right. So is that right? Possibly not. Right. But can they do much about it? I don't know what they can do about that. But that's the sort of like, the side effects of it. The other one is all the elections and stuff that get influenced, and it's not just like the big ones like Brexit and the US election. There's a Caribbean island that had. The firm that are involved in all that, they were involved in this Caribbean island election. On this Caribbean island, there were 2 sort of distinct groups of people who. My wife just opened the door then. Apologies. But there were like 2 main groups on this island. I forget where they were. But one group was very less likely to vote, and one group was very likely to vote in the younger generation, as you said. So one group was more influenced by their parents, and one group were less likely to vote at all. And just by getting, basically targeting this young generation, look, there's no point voting this, that, and the other. They basically managed to wangle this election for this group where they know the kids would vote because they would do what their parents said. Whereas, and again, it's like, okay, well, is that? I'm not sure that's right.
Yeah. But I think you make a good point, mate. I think there are, and that's what I'm saying. There's definitely moral conversations around AI and its use cases. But that's why that's what I mean when I say I think we almost need to separate AI use cases like that and what Microsoft are trying to do with the platform, because the Target thing's an interesting one, because see, from my perspective, maybe I'm naive and wrong here, that I'm not sure what Target can do about that if she's using the dad's card, and and ultimately that is. That, and I see that as a relevant thing that is, let's call it user error. And I think that's where Microsoft are going with it. I think there's a problem with the term AI. I think it's such a broad term that you say AI when it comes to reading on Twitter that some with data they've given you access to, that they're going on holiday and sending them a voucher for holiday products, and we sort of associate that with rigged elections. Completely understand why, but it's almost like there needs to be, and I just wonder if that's where Microsoft are trying to go with this term insights.
Yeah, quite possibly. I think my take on this is that you, when you posed the question, you qualified that question quite well, but I think it's in the qualification words that the issues are, because you said something along the lines of, if I've knowingly given that data away, was one phrase I think you used, and another one was something along the lines of, why wouldn't I want it presented back to me in the way that I want it presented back to me, and that I know I want it presented back to me? And my thoughts were, well, have I knowingly giving it away?
Yeah.
How do I know how I want it presented back to me? Now, this shows you how old I am. I actually worked for a company who were involved in technologies called expert systems back in the 90s, and they all stem out of AI and neural networks and advanced learning and all that sort of stuff. And the thing that drives me up the wall about bloody industry that we all work in is that we come up with a new term and we think that it's new, right? It's not. AI has been around since the 50s, frankly, or 60s certainly. And back when we were developing and delivering applications, it was called rules-based decision making. So you predicted a scenario based on a set of information that you were given, and you offered a result, an outcome as a as a point from that. So that I have a problem with the term AI as well, because it sounds like the Matrix, if you know what I mean with that, and I genuinely have an issue with that. I'd rather them call it something else. Insights is a much better word, so I'd agree with that. What I do think, though, that all organisations need to be conscious of is the scenario which constantly happens, is where computer says no, and you can't go forwards. Yes. You've got to have this real, something that's to date still only the human being can actually go, okay, computer says no is not the right answer. There's something computer is missing here in order to be able to that, and I need to deal with that within another way. Can I ask just to, so we'll probably bring things to a close fairly shortly, I guess, Geth, but I wanted to ask you a couple of things. Steve, there's what I thought you were going to pick up, that the not-for-profit, what's the right word? Tool set. I can't think what the right
accelerator.
That's the word, accelerator. Yeah. Thank you very much. But they're launching some new stuff to do with engagement opportunities. Essentially, it's with personalisation and targeting and so on and so forth that we're talking about, how they track engagement with their with their volunteers and the people who are donoring to them and so on and so forth. Have you? My question to you, I think to Steve, but potentially to you both, is for these sorts of accelerators, particularly the not-for-profit one because it's in our space. Have you seen much uptake? I know that's happening in the States, but have you seen a lot of uptake of the actual accelerator as opposed to SE or CE or whatever it might be? Because I keep seeing it being announced, but as yet I haven't seen much. But then again, I won't be as ubiquitous as the contact in the marketplace. Certainly, it's you, Steve. And I don't know about you, Joel, whether you've seen much of that or not. So that's one question, and I'll finish my question once you've answered that one, if you would.
Yeah, not as much as you would think by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's, as you said, what I've heard is it's a little bit more Americanized in the way it's constructed. And I think the solution to that is what they're bringing out or have brought out is with the fundraising and engagement module of Dynamics. But I think the source of the lack of uptake is potentially around. So the NFP charity sector is, in my opinion, more reliant on using a supplier than other sectors who might use contractors or whatever. And most suppliers, because it is a new thing, don't have a load of experience with the NFP accelerator. So you've got one or two or perhaps three or so that have loads of experience of implementing it because they're the self-proclaimed charity specialists. But then you're large, like I've had it recently, a charity engaged one of the big boy suppliers who claimed to have experience with the NFP accelerator, and then later they found out they didn't, and they needed to get a smaller lot in, and it just delayed the program. But I think it's just not as much as you would think, in short, and that's why perhaps I didn't maybe pick it, because it's got a way to come, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Joel, you got anything to add to that particularly?
No, not massive. I mean, I haven't seen it at all, really. I mean, that could be the sort of area of the market. Steve's probably got a better overview of the market and its pickup in that respect. But I think the accelerators are good if it aligns pretty perfectly with your business process and you have the money.
Yeah.
I think partners don't massively push it, if I'm being honest. Because I think what happens is they think, well, it doesn't totally fit, and we can make more money out of building something for them.
So I'm gonna finish with my question, Geth, and then I'll hand it back to you if that's okay. So I'm going to finish with a bugbear of mine, basically, and in one way, shape, or form. Actually, you've both talked about this. It's about skills, but more importantly, it's about skills improvement and skills adoption. So one of the things there's been a fair bit of announcement on is bigger and better search capabilities in one way, shape or form. And it kind of aligns to that changing the sizes of the columns and so on that you were talking about there 5 minutes ago, Joel. But my question is this, that I'm sort of using myself as a use case here, but I know, particularly in the sector that we're talking about, I know there'll be loads of people like this. How do we get people to get better at the basic skills that keep getting in, the functionality for which keeps getting enhanced, over time, drip fed through the wave releases, as you say, Joel. The slightly more sophisticated search capabilities. My take on it is, I'm just talking about search, but I could be talking about Excel, Word. I could be talking about anything here. My take on it is that the vast majority of people will be in this sort of Bell distribution curve, and they'll know how to do what they know how to do.
Yeah.
And until somebody finds them that use case and they make it obvious to them, search functionality, great. Yeah, I'm just going to read through my emails rather than type in something to search with. And how do we get that sort of? Because to me, that's where the mileage is. If you can get people to use, if we take Word as an example, right? People probably use 10% of the capabilities of Word. And obviously, I'm not saying that everybody will always use 100%, but we can all use Word way better than we use it. With that as the example, with search as an example, with Excel or whatever it is, how do we get better skills or people more inquisitive about learning those tiny noticeable things quite often?
I think for me, there's a couple of things. I'm going to keep this as short as possible. I think it comes back to the trusted partner, because actually, if I'm an organisation, let's say I'm a not for profit, whatever. I don't have masses of experience in-house. I don't have people in-house, as a lot of companies, not just non-profit, but a lot of companies don't, who are pouring through the release 2 wave guidelines, do you know what I mean, to see what the new cool functionality is. I need that partner to come to me and say, just so you know, can I book in a meeting with you just for an hour, just to chat through and give you some of the highlights of what's coming up in the platform. I think that relationship between the trusted partner and the product owner in a business can really be key, because by giving them that information, it can spark thought processes in the product owner who's hearing from business the challenges they're facing, and they can think, actually, do you know what? That would really improve that process.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of partners miss out on these opportunities because they either forget, aren't willing, or don't value that ongoing relationship building piece, that let's touch base in 3 months' time, or let's touch base twice a year, to tell you what the latest changes are, to go through with it, not to sell you services, but just to let you know what's happening with the platform you use. I think there's great value in that.
Mm-hmm. Steve?
Yeah, I think touching upon Joel's points, a trusted supplier would definitely help, and probably be the main driver. I think we need to bridge the gap between the accessibility to this functionality and the willingness of users to adopt it and to get interested in it, in a sense. So I just think one of the things I've heard before, actually, with a bit more of a business change hat on, is selecting business champions from different business areas. So if you're saying a trusted supplier will have an hour meeting with a product owner to go through this new wave 2 releases, new wave 2 functionality, for example, I don't think a next step would be product owner goes into a meeting for an hour with 10 business champions and has the same conversation. And then those business champions go away to each of their individual teams and has the same conversation. And that just needs to happen more. And I think what I hear a lot is that, we don't have time for that. Well, if you don't have time for it, then your users aren't going to know it, and then they're going to make mistakes, and then you're going to be busy fixing those mistakes, and you're not going to have time for anything else. So you need to make time for this stuff.
And I think that's probably at the heart of both the challenges from the supplier's perspective and the internal continual improvement side perspective, that neither side thinks there's enough value in doing it, and therefore they don't make the time for doing it. And I think they're both wrong, basically. Is my take on it. I'm not short of an opinion now and again, but frankly, I genuinely think that most organisations will get way more from incrementing this stuff and really working it, as opposed to going, oh, we've got a great new project, let's spend all our money on the new project. But let's still spend money on new projects, because that pays the bills, right?
Yeah, please.
And on that bombshell, we'll draw this to a close. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the summer edition of the PHIT podcast. Thanks to our guest, Steve Stiles of Nigel Frank, and Joel Abbott of XRM. Is it training, or is it XRM Solutions, Joel, or both?
XRM Consultant and
XRM
Training. Yeah.
XRM Training. Okay, cool. Well, thank you both for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.